The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Bob Jakowski with On Demand Advisors. Thank you for joining us today in our webinar. We look forward to your participation throughout the webinar. So as we have questions, please go ahead and post those questions, and I'll make sure we address them during the webinar, either in the initial webinar, in the Q&A session, or if we have too many questions, which sometimes happens, we'd be happy to address them offline. So today's webinar is, I think, an exciting topic, which is how do you verticalize and win your target markets and industries. As we go through our discussion today, we're going to give you many different examples of companies that were horizontally focused, that verticalized, and penetrated their individual markets. We're also going to talk about companies that are vertical and vertically focused today, and how they are looking at that focus. Is it effective? And are they using what I call level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4 verticalization? And what do each of those different levels mean? So we're going to walk through different examples with everybody today, but we want to make sure we're taking into account your needs, your objectives, and most importantly, we're going to talk about a couple of different lenses that you can look at today's subject through. One of those lenses is, how do you win a market? And what is a market or an industry? So if you are, for instance, horizontally focused on a number of different industries today, you may say, how do I go win the healthcare market? How do I win the market over here in manufacturing? And so we're going to talk about that today, because having a strategy to win a market as opposed to compete in that market is very different. One of the things I would also tell you as a serial CEO is that when you do win markets, you increase the value of your organization to your customers, to your partners, and to the outside world as far as investors. The second lens that you could look at is from a sales perspective. If any of you have been involved in sales, and let's say strategic sales, where you work long and hard on an enterprise account, and you finally win that account, one of the things that you always look at is, wow, we just won this wonderful account, and it's going to be a phenomenal strategic account for us and a partnership that we have going forward. The second idea that enters your head is, how do we find 20 more of these or 50 more of these accounts? And so what you learn as you work and engage with the customer is you learn their business, you learn their strategy, you learn what's important to them, you learn about their markets. And when you do that, it provides you with a foundation that you can take to other companies in that industry. The third lens that you can look at is from an R&D perspective. So when you think about meeting the needs of a customer, and let's say you develop a solution or a service for that customer, the one thing you look at is, if that's a highly desirable customer that you have today, and you have created a solution through both configuration as well as implementation for that customer, if you're like me, you're thinking about, wow, we found a really great customer. You found somebody that is highly profitable. So from an R&D perspective, you already have a solution. Now what you're thinking about is, how do I find 50 more companies that actually are really a good fit? That's a very different strategy than looking at an inbound strategy, where you're trying to twist and turn the organization based upon every new opportunity that rises. And so there's intentionality that we're going to talk about in today's webinar. A fourth lens is just profitability. So profitability comes also with repeatability. And profitability means that when you find a vein of gold, how do you mine that vein of gold over and over again? Because once you've done something the first time, let's say win a flagship account in the manufacturing industry, the next thing you're going to be looking at is, why don't we win 10 more accounts like that in the manufacturing or in the aerospace industry or in another industry? So we're going to talk about that today, because these are really great lenses to think about as you're thinking about whether you apply a verticalization strategy at your company today. Okay, so again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to your participation. So Craig and I founded On Demand Advisors as a revenue acceleration agency 13 years ago. And we really have a mission. Our mission is to help executives like you really accelerate revenue growth. So most companies have some type of growth plan or growth number, as I call it, that they're thinking about growing, let's say in 2022, 30% year over year. The question that I have typically is not whether you have a number. We all have numbers. The question is, how do we make that number real? How do we actually execute against that number? And how do we do it in a very intentional fashion? So there are three things when you think about on-demand advisors, think about us as a revenue acceleration agency that perhaps set us apart from anybody else. One is that we're focused on strategy. So we're always thinking about intentionality. If you think you want to grow your revenue by, let's say, 30% or 50% year over year, you intentionally want to think about where does that revenue need to come from? How do you engineer those outcomes for your company? That's intentionality versus experimentation. The second thing we're going to talk about is on this next slide, which is we've created a revenue acceleration system. This is something that we perfected over many, many B2B companies. Many of them are services companies, software companies, SaaS companies, but we have really perfected this over that period of time. When we started out, Craig and I started out at Intact, we were the CEO and CMO for Intact, a very fast, rapidly growing SaaS cloud company. And we created this acceleration system at Intact. But of course, since then, we perfected this with many clients. So the key here is you need a system. And that's really the second thing, is we're bringing a system to the table that can give you the best practices and the certainty in terms of how to scale revenue. And then the third thing I think that's important is scale. We realize that it's all about scaling. So if you grow the company 30% year over year in 2020, then you're going to be looking at 2020, in 2022, then you're going to be looking at 2023 and saying, well, what do we want to do this year? Do we want to grow at 30% again or something different? So it's not only about a one-hit wonder, if you will. It's about doing it year in, year out, quarter in, quarter out. And it's about being able to scale. So we think that speed is very important versus the status quo. We think the system is very important because you need predictability versus hiring the persona, as I call it, which is a VP of sales, a VP of marketing, or a VP of business development, and putting your faith in that individual. You really need a system that you can have faith in that's going to give you the predictability you're looking for. And then finally, strategy. So being intentional about where you want to get to. And as we said, we work with a lot of different companies. One of the questions I normally get when I'm engaging with lots of different audiences is, are we too big for you? Are we too small for you? And the key is we work with companies of all sizes. So it's important to have the right strategy, to have the right solution and execution for every company. But we work with companies that are newly minted startup companies through large companies, as you can see some of the logos that you see on the screen here. So let me give you 3 examples. I call it the need to verticalize. And I think it's really important because to understand how 3 companies decided they needed to do a better job in terms of verticalization. Intact is a software as a service financial applications ERP company. And I was the CEO at Intact and Craig was the CMO. And one of the things that we learned quickly is that we couldn't go after 6 million companies in, let's say, the United States and decide we were going to do that because we didn't have the money to go do that or the wherewithal. So we quickly needed to decide where did we have fit. So looking at our solutions, we had to decide where do we actually have really great fit today, not in 18 months or 24 months, but today. And then secondly, where were inflection points? Which markets were needing our solution as the next step as they move from, let's say, QuickBooks to Intact? And the third thing that we were looking at is which were the attractive markets or industries we needed to focus on. So we did apply the Jeffrey Moore bowling pin strategy here and said, let's go figure out which markets are the best fit for us, are in an inflection point, are attractive, and let's go after those markets first. And so at Intact, we did apply this. And if you go to the Intact website today, under industries, you'll see this type of verticalization that is in place today in terms of how do they go to market. Let's talk about another example. This is one of our clients, Avid Exchange. When we began working with Avid Exchange, they were in what I call the red ocean, which is they were providing accounts payable automation solutions to many different companies, but they were primarily focused on one industry, which is the property management industry, commercial property management companies. And they were very good at this. But one of the things that we wanted to do with them is we wanted to make sure that they could fully penetrate and win that market first, which we helped them do. The second thing that they were wondering about is, do we go after other markets? So for instance, one of their customers was Regions Bank. And they really didn't know whether Regions Bank was a vertical that they should go after. So rather than just put some people and resources and dollars and expenses into that market, what we suggested to them is apply some buyer intelligence to the financial services vertical first. Let's really understand what drives decision makers in this market. Let's see what assumptions you have from property management into financial services, whether those hold true. And let's figure that out with decision makers before we actually invest. And so we use that whole methodology with Avid Exchange to help them then get directly involved and go win 6 additional industries or vertical markets. And so it was very capital efficient. It was very structured, and it was very sound in terms of we helped them to do that. Now, in their case, we were fortunate to really work with Mike Prager and his team, because we helped them double revenue every year during the 4 years that we worked with them. Of course, Bain Capital came in, put $250 million into the company, and then last year, Avid Exchange went public. Let's talk about one more example. This is a company called ICUC. They are a global leader in social media management services. So they are a pure services company. And it was interesting when we began working with ICUC, there were a couple of things that were really important to them. One is scale. They realized that even though they had some really great people in marketing, they just weren't scaling like they needed to because they wanted to grow at 67% year over year. So we actually helped them do that. We complemented their team and helped them scale and grow. One of the things that we did that was interesting, though, is that they sell their social media management services to the Fortune 2500, the Starbucks, Novartis, Macy's, Google, these type of companies. What was interesting as we worked with them is we asked them, have you ever gained any buyer intelligence with your prospective companies, and really interviewed and surveyed the head of social media for these companies? And they had not. So we did that for them. What was interesting was that we found that the head of social media at all these companies really wanted to understand what their peers were doing in their industry. So if I was Starbucks and I was in the food and beverage industry, I wasn't necessarily interested in what Novartis was doing in pharmaceutical, but I was interested in what other companies were doing in the food and beverage industry. So here again, we found the need to verticalize, and this is the third example that I wanted to share with you. The other thing that we talk about as we think through the revenue acceleration system is that you really have 3 funnels, and this could be broken down for each of the verticals that you have and then consolidated up to the company level. You've got your marketing funnel, you've got your lead conversion funnel, and you got your sales funnel. So if our goal is to ascertain and win another $4 million of revenue for this year in financial services, this is what it would look like. So we would know exactly what we'd have to do in terms of marketing, creating market qualified leads. We would know what we'd have to do as far as converting those market qualified leads into sales qualified leads, which is the second funnel. And then how do we convert those sales qualified leads into customers in the third funnel? So it's really important to have these metrics down, because what we're doing here is we're helping think through and put in that predictable revenue engine that you're thinking about. Now, this would be for financial services. If we went to manufacturing as another vertical for this company, we'd say, well, we need $2 million in manufacturing. How do we do that? Again, the metrics would hold true. They would be different. We'd probably have different conversion factors. We would have different levels that we need to ascertain. But one of the keys you'll find when you start thinking about the verticals in this way is really truly understanding what do you need to create in terms of demand, how do you convert that demand, and then how do you get those customers. And so we can do that in a variety of industries, including healthcare. And this is essentially what we did with ICUC, for instance. We actually helped them really get into 12 different industries or verticals, and we helped them go penetrate those and have great success scaling the company in those areas. So what I have to do now is just talk about what's the business case. So whenever you're thinking about making a strategic choice for your company, the question is, what's the business case to do this? And I want to talk about 4 areas that would be of benefit to you as you're thinking about verticalization. The first one is becoming what we call the company, the market standard. And this is all about accelerating growth. One of the things that you'll find when you focus on a vertical is that as you win more and more strategic companies and customers in that and clients in that vertical, is you have the way to start talking about yourself as the marketing standard. One of the interesting things I found when I did this working at Dun & Bradstreet Software a number of years ago is we founded the healthcare vertical. And so a number of us actually created the healthcare vertical. And we were working with every major healthcare institution in North America. What was interesting is, as we looked at growing that business, we had 3 times the success per sales rep in healthcare than we did in the horizontal geography. So that really showed us the value, the power of tripling the sales results that we were getting by focusing on the verticalization. Those sales executives, those advisors that we had, they became subject matter experts, industry experts in the healthcare vertical, truly understanding the needs of decision makers and then networking those decision makers with each other so that it formed a community. So what we ended up doing is the third point here, which is gain competitive immunity against horizontally focused competitors in that space. And then the fourth thing is just accelerating the sales cycle through credibility. Another reason or business reason to think about verticalization is aligning with your buyer. So one of the most important things that I found, and I think you'll find, is how do you understand your buyer? How do you understand the decision maker? And even though we've conducted hundreds of buyer intelligence surveys, the thing that's really been consistent across every survey that we've done is that peers look to peers. So if I'm in a supply chain space, and let's say I'm running an operation, a shipping operation in supply chain, I'm going to be thinking about what are my peers doing at other companies in terms of managing their shipping process that they have today. What can I learn from them? What are they doing well? What are the best practices? How do I apply them to my business? So that becomes really important. The third reason for thinking about verticalization is elevating your game. It's moving the tactical to the strategic. Many times when we're working with clients, they're very focused on what their service is, very focused on the software or the solution. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But one of the things you'll find as you start moving up this ladder is thinking about how do you appeal to the strategic decision maker, the economic buyer at these companies. And the way you do that is providing strategic positioning to them about meeting their needs, their industry, their goals. And so really understanding what are the unique challenges and value propositions for the industry really enhances your ability to talk competently to that decision maker and being able to differentiate your solution against all the other competitors. The final reason for thinking about the business case for verticalization is the ecosystem. So when you think about the ecosystem, One of the things that I find, and I'll give you an example, at Intact, when I was a CEO at Intact, we wanted to provide our financial management solutions into the professional services area. We realized that we didn't have the whole solution. So we partnered with another company from the Northeast called Open Air, which really provided a professional services automation solution. And we married those two solutions together into a combined solution so that we can create the whole solution for that market. This is a great way for you to think about working with partners to create either the whole solution or the whole service for your customers to manage their needs. It also helps amplify and magnify your coverage in the market when you start working with market makers or vertical service providers. One of the things that is most interesting when you think about systems integrators, you'll notice all of them are verticalized. All those systems integrators don't align based upon just the services that they provide. They align based upon the industries that they serve because they realized a long time ago to be strategic, they need to understand the industry. So let's talk about starting your verticalization strategy and how that looks today. And we're going to talk about 4 different levels. And you can choose which level you want to be at any point in time. For instance, level 1 may be you verticalize at the marketing level. Level 2 may be you start verticalizing at the product or solution level. Level 3, you may decide you want to start verticalizing at the sales level. And then 4 is at the delivery level for your clients. So let's walk through what each of these look like. And I'll show you some examples as we go throughout today. So the first thing we do is we start with strategy. So how do we think about verticalization? Well, first we've got to prioritize what industries or markets are out there. And as we did at Intact in the discussion I went through earlier with you today, we talked about some of the key criteria we used to prioritize each of the different industries or markets. We determined who were the decision makers. We determined what we wanted to package as far as industry solutions and creating that whole solution. And then we also wanted to make sure we engage with industry influencers. So in every industry, there are always industry influencers that you can tap into to provide additional credibility and coverage. So let's talk about marketing, verticalizing marketing. Well, when we work with our clients to help them think through that, we typically start with a marketing and messaging workshop. And that's really where we're thinking through how do we think about what are the messaging and capabilities that are really unique that you can apply to that industry. And then how do you map those to decision makers in terms of what's important to them? So you may actually have different levels or different personas at an executive level, at a mid-level, and at a user level at these different levels that you have. We typically also do the validation. So what ends up happening as we work with owners and business owners and CEOs and the teams that we have, the executive teams, is we all make a lot of assumptions along the way about what we're doing, how we're penetrating markets, assumptions about our buying audience, assumptions about what they want to see or what they want to hear. And the best way to validate that is through a buyer intelligence survey. And then the third thing that we look at from a marketing perspective is starting to create those really highly desirable sales assets that are going to engage with your target market. So let me give you an example of what some of those could look like. So for instance, one of our customers is a company called Bestech. Bestech is an engineering firm out of Canada and a very successful firm. And so when you think about Bestech, they provide a whole set of engineering services to many different companies across North America and globally. One of the things that they wanted to do was focus on the mining industry. And of course, Canada is very big in mining, so is Australia and other countries. And so what we did is we actually helped them create this overview, talking specifically to decision makers in the mining industry. So this is about what Bestech does in the mining industry. You can see the table of contents as we're entering into the mine itself. And we talk about the different phases, but more importantly, we talked about the life cycle in the mine itself. And if you think about the life cycle of the mine of the, let's say, 3,200 mines that are active today worldwide, they could provide their services at different phases of that mine, of the life cycle of the mine. So whether it's in the exploration phase, the development, construction, operation, or the closure phase, they have very specific services that they can provide. And so this is a great way of talking to the vertical, talking to the industry, and making sure they understand how your services are going to benefit them as they go through the life cycle of the mine. So that's one example I wanted to share with you. Let's cover another example. We talked about ICUC. And in many cases, you may find, well, gee, Bob, that's great to verticalize, but these companies that we work with don't want to give us permission to use their name or logo or be a testimony to us. So how do we do that? Well, this is a great way in terms of how we did this with ICUC. So this is, as you can imagine, in the retail space, this is Macy's. So you'll find that we've done a customer success story on Macy's for ICUC, which is just phenomenal in terms of what they get from ICUC, but we never talked about their name or their logo. And if we switched over and said, let's talk about Novartis, again, you may know who this company is, but again, this is a success story that was created specifically at the industry level to talk to customers and prospects that ICUC would have in the pharmaceutical space. And then finally, one more in the CPG space. Here we are talking about Michaels, which has 1,000 stores in North America, and really talking about how this ICUC really helped them manage social media risk and provide the type of deliverables and outcomes that are necessary to them. But anyway, I wanted to give you an example, at least of some of these really important sales tools that we talk about, but how do they get created at the vertical or the industry level? Let's talk about the next area, which is verticalizing sales. So when you start thinking about this, you start saying, well, we really love to do that. Can we start this process on our website? And so one of the things that we've done is we've created a great revenue acceleration innovation called the Sales Driven Website. And on the website is the buyer's journey. Now you can do the buyer's journey lots of different ways. You can do it by persona, you can do it by solution, you can do it by industry, you can do it by market, or a variety of other ways. But one of the keys is when somebody comes to your website, can you walk them through the buyer's journey that would be appropriate for their industry? Can you walk them through the information that is going to support their decision to engage with you? And so this becomes very important. One of our customers, by the way, is Technical Toolboxes, and we've been working with Technical Toolboxes for 3 years. Just a really marvelous company, and they provide solutions, engineering performance management solutions, to the engineering groups. And we actually looked at providing their solution because they're focusing on oil and gas, lots of different ways. But one of the keys is we can do that by persona. We can do that by solution. And of course, we're talking specifically to each of those personas in the oil and gas industry. So as you can see here, we're going to be very efficient. We're going to start the sales cycle on the website. For the buyer, we're going to start the buyer's journey on the website. And we're going to use this powerful magnet and engine to convert visitors into prospects. So again, these are just different examples that I wanted to share with you today. But as you verticalize at the sales level and you start saying, Jennifer is going to focus in on oil and gas, and Nate's going to focus in on manufacturing, and Jim's going to focus in on aerospace. You start thinking about these verticals and you start saying, how do we equip that? So we do that through the sales journey on the website by industry or market. And then you start segmenting your execution for the markets. So what I found that is really exciting is being able to think about how does that person start getting that industry expertise in sales. So you can have two choices here. You can either hire people in the industry who understand the industry already, or I guarantee you, if they focus on the industry, after a number of months, they're going to start becoming industry experts in that industry. So the key here also is you start aligning with and leveraging with industry partners, industry influencers, and industry leaders. And so this can be very, very effective as you think about your verticalization strategy. Another level to think about is at the product or solution level. So when you start focusing on the industry, you start thinking about how do you fully develop all of your use cases. So a number of you that are joining us today may be focused on what we call Internet of Things or IoT. And so when you think about technology, technology is fantastic, but your customers and prospects need to understand how to apply your services, how to apply your solutions in their company. And so fully developing out your use cases so they can appreciate how they can leverage your solution in a number of different ways becomes really important. The other thing that you find as you progress through time is you start developing industry specific capabilities and differentiators. And we found this with many companies. Sometimes it just came through customer request, but those weren't being leveraged in terms of industry presentation. They were unique to the industry, unique to the needs of that industry, but they weren't being focused on that industry. And then when you think about my earlier example of at Intact, of providing the whole solution, it's amazing how when you think about your solution today, there's always something bigger than your solution or your service. And so when you start thinking in those terms, you start thinking about your solution in the industry through the customer's eyes and start focusing on what could that whole solution grow to? And then how do you continue to do that? Um, let's talk about the fourth area. And the fourth area is verticalizing delivery. And probably one of the most important things here is to create what we call lighthouse accounts. So let me share with you another example. When I was the chief revenue officer at a company called Rightworks, we were focused on e-procurement solutions, and we competed with Ariba and Commerce One. And one of our very first customers in the early days is Wells Fargo Bank. And we said, well, great, we're going to win the business, and we're going to provide our solution to manage all of the purchasing within the bank of the 50 to 60,000 employees that are using any requisitioning today. So we did that. But what was interesting is, as we worked with Matt Graves, who was our sponsor at Wells Fargo Bank, we also said, you know, this platform could really provide a leverage buying service to all Wells Fargo customers. And since they were the number one provider of small business loans, we said, well, what do small businesses want to do once they get that loan from Wells Fargo Bank? Well, they want to go out and buy something. But what they don't have is they don't have leverage. So we said, let's create an exchange, and let's provide that that exchange with all of these solutions and services and products to these customers, and let's pass along the Wells Fargo discount to them. And so it became an incredible success. It's what I call the in and out model. So right away, we had this lighthouse account. We were helping them manage and reduce cost for all of the acquisitions that they were doing for MRO and throughout the bank, as far as requisitioning supplies and materials. But we also created an exchange within the same footprint to offer those additional products and goods and services to all of their customers at a significant discount. Once we did this with one lighthouse account, we found that every bank in North America was interested in the same value proposition. And it was just amazing to be able to do that. So we were able to start verticalizing on the delivery and working with banks in general as one of our key verticals. When you do this also, you start what I call memorializing industry references. The challenge what we found, and I think that you may find, is that when you have a reference, that reference can change from day to day. People can leave, your sponsor may go somewhere else, things happen. And so being in a position to memorialize those through case studies, through video testimonials, through that type of media becomes really important for other decision makers in the industry. And then whether this is in virtual or whether this is in person, just being able to form industry user groups. We've always had this saying that birds of a feather flock together, and it's true. When you are in a situation, for instance, one of our new clients that we're working with provides real-time operational dashboards and analytics to many of these industries. And so as we work with them, their solution may be in energy, and they offer this solution as far as KPIs, specifically on how to manage your company in the energy space. Well, those energy companies want to get together and talk about what's important as far as the KPIs and the operations and best practices that they have in energy management. So this is a great way to verticalize and to leverage that expertise. So what we covered in today's webinar is the 4 levels of verticalization. You can verticalize at the marketing level and just stop there. You can move forward as far as product management and start thinking about what are the capabilities that are unique to each industry or market that you serve. You can focus further on sales and say that's level 3. We're going to focus on sales, and we're going to have individual sales or sales teams focusing on different industries. Or you can focus on finally level 4, which is delivery. And how do you deliver your service or solution to unique markets or verticals? So this is really a great framework for you to think about, food for thought. And what I'd like to do right now is open this up to all of you as attendees and determine what questions do you have? What questions can we answer now? So go ahead if you could, post the questions, and I'll make sure that we can address them. This first one is from George. George asks, how do I choose which vertical to start with? Good question, George, because it probably begets a conversation we could have with you. But when you think about your first vertical, sometimes you should start with where you're at, which is you may already have a vertical or industry where you already have a concentration, where you have a great fit, where you actually have referenceable accounts. And that might be a great place to start with, and then figure out how do you pivot from that. But great question. Okay, let's go to our next question. This one is from Mary. Mary says, do I duplicate expenses when I verticalize? It's a good question. I would say instead of duplicate, I would say you partition. So in other words, when you're thinking about this in your go-to-market strategy, Mary, you're thinking about, I'm going to go after these verticals directly. I'm also still going to go after the broader market. So I don't think you give up the broader market. I think what this is a partitioning strategy that you think about what do we need to do at the horizontal level, but more importantly, what do we need to do to have the credibility and the wherewithal to penetrate key markets that we can actually go win. Okay, moving right along here. Let's see if there's another question. This one is from James. James said, how do I understand the needs of each vertical? It's good. I think that I would say it's a 2-step process, James, that we applied at On Demand Advisors. The first step is to really get together with the management team and understand what questions you have regarding the vertical, what questions you have that you want to validate with the right answers. And then what I found to be the most persuasive way to find those answers is to conduct a buyer intelligence survey with decision makers in that vertical. Because what they'll tell you is the business challenges that you solve, they'll tell you how important those are to them. With the value propositions you offer, they'll also rank those and tell you what's prioritized there. And finally, as far as the offers and the engagement, they'll tell you what they need from you. So that becomes just an outstanding way to engage with each vertical industry and think through how you want to do this. Okay, thank you for the questions. Really appreciate that. So let's talk about next steps. One next step you may want to consider is start verticalization with one industry or one market. If you haven't done it already, uh, let's work together and prioritize your first industry that you want to win. And I regularly say win is dominate and win. And then we can help you research your verticalization strategy and provide some in-depth market analysis. We do this all the time with our clients to think strategically about the different verticals that they have or industries, and then think about which ones do you start with. The third thing would be just begin. Begin with what I call level one, which is verticalize your marketing efforts for that first industry, and then decide how vertical do you want to deploy. As we talked about the 4 different levels for today, level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4. And then build this repeatable winning strategy. As you do that with your first vertical, then you can start saying, how do we apply that to our next vertical and the next vertical after that? And then pretty soon you start realizing you've got a very strong, a very effective strategy to go win different markets in a repeatable way. So these are some thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts too. So this is my contact information. Craig's contact information is here. We're the managing partners for On Demand Advisors. And here's our phone number, our website, and we would love to hear from you as far as your thoughts. So I'll be following up with everybody, sending you the verticalization guide that is the companion piece for today's webinar so that you'll have that. And be happy to talk to you about your thoughts around verticalization. And if you are verticalized today, you may be thinking about how do you do a better job of it. If you're not verticalized today, you may be thinking about how do you get started to give yourself competitive advantage and better profitability. And then if you are thinking about you're halfway there, there may be a strategy that says, how do you prioritize where you're at today and how do you move forward? I'd also like to invite you to join us for our next webinar that we're going to have next month. And it's really going to be focused around revenue metrics that drive your business. And we'll be sending out invitations for that too. So on behalf of myself, Craig, and our entire On Demand Advisors team, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for today's webinar and look forward to incredible success for you in 2022 as you verticalize and win your target markets and industries. Thank you, everyone.